And I don't know if I can project well enough, and I don't want to stand up on the ledge here, but let me tell you, I'll tell you a very little bit about these cases, and then if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. So, I wish I could remember the date that we filed, but it was I think April 23rd and April 26th. We filed 7 applications with the federal court contesting the outcome of the election in 7 ridings across the country. There's one in BC, there's another one in Saskatchewan, there are 2 in Manitoba, and there are 3 in Ontario. And we're entitled to do that, or an elector who is entitled to vote in a riding is entitled to go to the federal court or a court of superior court in the province, bring an application to have the election results annulled where there was fraud, illegal activity, irregular practices that affected the result of the election. So that's the test. You have to establish, in our case, that there was fraudulent or illegal activity that affected the outcome of the election. And we contend that indeed that happened in the 7 ridings, and they were all won by Conservatives, and the people who voted in those ridings were defrauded of their democratic franchise, and these are applications to get that democratic right that they're entitled to, that's protected under the Constitution, back. The evidence that we've gathered since then, and I'll tell you a little bit about that, suggests that indeed the activity was far more widespread, and there were far more than 7 results that were probably taken away from the people that voted in that May 2011 election by voter suppression activities that were carried out to the benefit of the Conservative Party, whoever carried them out. So what we have in terms of the evidence that we filed, or that we served on the other parties and we will file in court, is evidence of individuals in each of those ridings that received a telephone call asking them to identify themselves as Conservative Party or not Conservative Party supporters, and then a subsequent telephone call misdirecting them on or before election day. So we have evidence from individuals in each of those ridings that describe this very similar pattern. So whether you were in Vancouver Island North is the riding, or Rosetown, Georgetown, Saskatoon, Rosetown, Bigger in Saskatchewan, or Elmwood, Transcona, or Nipissing, Temiskaming, the same pattern of voter suppression activity took place. So that's one element of our evidentiary case in support of these applications. Another is an affidavit by a woman named, a very courageous woman named Annette Desgagnés, who worked for RMG, who actually made calls misdirecting people. Now, she didn't know that at first, but as she made these calls announcing that Elections Canada had changed the polling station in various ridings, and she called right across the country, she started to get pushback from the people she was calling, who corrected her. They'd already voted, or they happened to know that the polling station had moved. And so she became suspicious that indeed she was involved in some terrible misdirection of people on election day that might prevent them from voting, and actually called the RCMP at the time and reported this to Elections Canada, and has now given affidavit evidence, which is her sworn evidence in this case, which we filed in support of all 7 applications. We also filed in support of the applications an affidavit by Robert Penner, who runs a company named Stratcom, who does this kind of work. The kind of work I'm referring to as voter identification work and getting out the vote, right? This is what political parties do during an election campaign. They figure out who their supporters are in a particular riding, and then close to election day and on election day, they have to get those people to the polls. So that's voter identification, get out the vote, and he does this for the NDP. And looking at the facts that we've gathered in support of our cases and what he has surmised from reading the media accounts, his evidence is that this could have only happened as an organized, orchestrated campaign by someone at the center of the campaign apparatus he doesn't identify the Conservative Party, but it's clear that as the beneficiaries, it would have had to have been there. And someone who had access to the database, not just for one riding, you've read about the drama around Guelph, but for all of the ridings this took place in, and who also had the authority to go out and spend money, not on the automated dialing, which is what happened in the Guelph case. It's very inexpensive, you may have noticed, but the voice calling as well, the kind of calling that Annette Desgagnés did. She actually, coincidentally, remembers calling into the Nipissing riding because she had to get help in terms of pronouncing it. There was no voting poll change in Nipissing. And in fact, in the 7 ridings that we brought applications in, there was one single poll change. In one of those ridings, it was Vancouver Island North in one poll. So all of these calls indicating that polls had changed were fraudulent to the degree that they were placed to individuals in any of these 7 ridings. The last piece of evidence we have, which is the most powerful, I think, is the evidence of Frank Graves from ECOS, who did a survey of the people in these ridings, in the 7 ridings, and people in a comparison group of ridings where we think there was less likelihood of voter suppression activity. And what he found was, and he had a sample of 500 in each of our 7, so 3,500 and then 1,500 in the broader sample. What he found was that this activity was ubiquitous. It happened everywhere. But in our ridings, it was more intense, and it was clearly targeted at Liberal and NDP supporters, 1. And 2, so it happened, it was targeted. Now that's speculation in the media, but this report isn't speculation. It's evidence from an expert who does this type of survey work for a profession. And then the last thing he found, which is probably the most important thing he found, was that the suppression activity was effective. That his confidence limits are 0.9 to 2.2%, but roughly 1.5% of the electorate was discouraged from voting in ridings, in these 7 ridings. So that's, 1,000 people. It depends on the number of eligible voters in the riding. But we're dealing with ridings where the margin in 6 was below 1,000. And in the 7th was 1,800, and you'd have to get to the upper ends of the confidence limit to capture that 1,800. But there are obviously other ridings in Canada where the margins are close, and our evidence is that this was a ubiquitous practice. It wasn't just Guelph, it was certainly everywhere where the race was close, and where this might have tipped the balance. So those are the cases. The Tories have told us they will bring applications to strike bring a motion to strike our applications. They've been telling us that now for 5 weeks. We don't yet have the motions. We don't think there's any chance of them succeeding. We suspect the strategy will be to throw every conceivable roadblock in our way to tire us out. For those of you who know me, we don't tire easily. Not just me, but certainly my firm. And there it is. So if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, it's wonderful that you're all here. And it's just a very important thing to do. And, this group may grow. I hope it does. But even so, people fight and die for democratic rights around the world. I never thought we'd have to defend ours. But our evidence is that the last election was stolen by the Conservative Party. And they would not have a majority government but for voter suppression activities. That's our evidence. There are only 7 ridings that are the subject of our application, but we intend to prove that claim in court. There you go.
Thank you.